If you love liberty, declare your independence by signing the Shire Society Declaration at shiresociety.com.
All right, let's get going. Public hearing on House Bill 214, repealing prohibitions on electronic device usage while driving. Welcome, Representative Schlein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I do have some packets to hand out. Introducing House Bill 214, repealing prohibitions on electronic device usage while driving. And for the record, I'm Representative Eric Schlein, representing Hillsborough 37, Councilor Cullum. I'm going to be just a minute. I do have another commitment after this. The reason I introduced this bill simply is the law as we currently have it is the way that I see it. Perhaps some of you see it differently. Is that the law is ineffective. It doesn't work. It doesn't do what it's intended. Which the intention is to make the road safer, which we all would like to reduce accidents and fatality rates as much as possible. I don't know anyone who would want the opposite. But I think it's important to look at when you have an intention. Is the result fulfilling the intention? And the packet that I give you, I've been doing research on this, and there have been lots of studies over the years on these kinds of bills, and they show that either these laws don't work, and in some cases the study shows that accidents actually increase because you're driving and you have your cell phone, and now you start texting under the steering wheel, and I think that you get that. So that's all my testimony. I do have to go. There's someone else going to be speaking on accidents in New Hampshire since these laws have passed, and plenty of people on both sides. So I will let the committee figure that out. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next up, and supporting the bill, Ian Freeman.
Hello, good morning. Ian Freeman, one of the co-chairs of the New Hampshire Liberty Party. I have seen the unintended consequences. You guys have studies in front of you, and obviously those should be looked at closely. But I've seen people. I sit in front of a window when I'm not here, and I watch traffic go by. I've seen countless people continually using their phones anyway, regardless of this law, and certainly have seen people holding the phone down low, rather than what they might have used to have done, which would have been to hold it up here to where at the very least they could still somewhat peripherally see what was going on. They're now holding it down here and looking down as they're driving. It seems to me to be far more dangerous, and I'm sure you're going to hear from the police here in a few moments with a lot of fear-mongering. I would say please take those studies under serious consideration. This seems to be more about revenue for the state than it does to be about safety. And that's all I have to say. Thanks for listening.
Questions from the committee? Representative O'Brien?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Freeman, do you drive, and in your driving experience, because you seem to be a student looking out the window, but as you look out the car window, have you ever been behind somebody who was texting and see the drifting of the road? And
texting while driving is incredibly dangerous activity. There's no doubt about that. But laws are not magic, and they create unintended consequences. People will behave in ways that they believe will get them out of being caught from this particular law. So you're taking a dangerous activity and making it even more dangerous by making the handheld use of a phone illegal completely, by making it so they have to hide the device.
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions? Representative Oshawa?
So, thank you, Mr. Freeman. I'm just curious. I know that you and the representative prior to you have used the example of people putting their cell phone down below the dash, and that this is a law that is difficult to enforce, and therefore we should let it go. I'm not sure how old you are, but there was a time when you used to be able to have a beer and drive, and we said that that was also not a good idea because it endangers people around us. And so for the first couple of years,
Is there a
people
question?
used to put a beer between their legs and hide that, but we didn't repeal the law. So you're saying that, are you saying that this, thank you.
Are you coming to a question
I am
eventually?
asking my question,
I see
thank
where she's
you.
going, it's fine.
Are you saying that we should not keep this law in place because it is difficult to enforce?
No, well, first of all, you have evidence in front of you that shows that it's actually contrary to your intention. So the results of the law are resulting in more dangerous driving and more accidents. So if what you want to do is keep people safe, you need to repeal this law so they can use their cell phone in as safe a manner as possible, because they're going to continue to use the cell phone regardless of what the law says. Ultimately, the people who get caught for this are only going to have to, pay the state. Whether or not that teaches them a lesson, I can tell you that in a lot of cases when people get caught for victimless crimes like this one, they just keep doing the same behavior and just become more and more cautious about it. So, kids that get arrested for open container, they don't stop drinking the next weekend. They go right back to it, just maybe a little more careful about it in the future.
Representative Cleaver?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you text while driving, or do you wish to do so?
I do not text while driving. It's a dangerous activity, and I know that it definitely distracts from driving. But this law does more than criminalize texting while driving. It's written very broadly, and so I believe that depending on the interpretation, and again, your intentions are different from the way the police might interpret the law and the courts might interpret it. My understanding that you can't even legally use a GPS device unless it is integrated with the car's electronics. So I think plenty of people use GPS devices while they're driving and can do them safely. That's a whole different story than texting, which requires a lot of button presses and a lot of attention, whereas a GPS is a different story. But it's all criminalized because of this law.
And note to the committee, we should never ask someone testifying if they are engaging in activity that is currently against the law.
That's why I added if they wish to do so.
Especially where cameras going.
Further questions from the committee? Thank you, Mr. Freeman.
Thanks for listening.
I mean, really, then what do you do? Especially with Captain Shapiro in the room. All right. Next up, Dennis Goddard, in support of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, I'll put my phone away and inform you that I drove about 40 miles an hour down to 35 to get here. Just really briefly, I kind of want to extend on what's been said. One of my favorite Nobel Prize laureates pointed out that we should judge policies not based on their intentions, but on their demonstrated results. I'm sure you have some of this in the packet in front of you, but I want to get it up here while we're in testimony. As of a study posted in, actually it came out in the Concord Monitor back in August of this past year, the rate of fatalities every year, fatalities on our roads every year has been rising dramatically since the enactment of this prohibition. Significantly meaning 61% higher in 2016 than it was in 2014, and it was higher also in 2015. It was sort of a one-off blip. Now that doesn't tell us exactly what the cause was, but there is certainly a correlation between the largest change that I know of, certainly that most residents of New Hampshire are aware of in terms of their driving in the present day. And I briefly want to talk about the sort of broadness of the law. I think it's interesting that you get a pass. If not, it doesn't, by the way, the law doesn't say anything about integrating with your car. It says that it has to be Bluetooth. As a computer engineer, I find it a little bit odd that we should choose one particular protocol. I mean, there's also other wireless protocols that could equally be used. It's the kind of thing that happens when people who aren't necessarily experts in an area try to micromanage activity in that area. It's going to necessarily be broad and potentially limiting to future technologies. But I'm certainly one of those people who don't know whether we're breaking the law. I don't make as, well, I'm not going to spend as much on a car with an integrated system as the state might like. I still have a pretty old beat up car. And I do in fact have a GPS on my phone that I sometimes leave right there on the seat beside me and glance at from time to time. Now, the way I see the law written, occasionally and incidentally using that GPS to go and plug in something or maybe change my route or do a bunch of things that in my opinion would in fact be very dangerous, so I don't do them, perfectly legal, as long as the thing has a Bluetooth that connects to my car. I do the same thing with like, no, I don't want to take that text right now. I just received a communication and broke the law. So at minimum, I think it's clear that there's some tightening that needs to happen in the language of the bill. But what myself and I think others who are motivated to come here today, private citizens at least, are telling you that it's not working. Last point I wanted to make. Most of you on the committee, most of you, and myself are old when it comes to technology. And so we text like this. In fact, I've got my over 40 glasses on, so I text like this. I should not text while I'm driving. Teenagers text like this. I don't know how they text like this, but they do. I could not do that. That doesn't mean that teenagers should drive and text. I think that would be a bad idea. But most of us have in our minds the notion of how we interact with this technology based on the way that we individually interact with this technology, and not maybe the way with those who are more native to it than us oldsters are. Thank you.
Questions from the committee? All right, thank you. Representative True.
Point of information.
Sure.
Are any other sponsors scheduled to speak?
No.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, where was Mr. Bauer from? Sorry,
Hopkinton.
as a private citizen?
Yes.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Is that blue or pink happening?
Pink.
Yeah, I see. Funny point of information for the last speaker. The chairman of the committee for the past 16 years has been a software and systems integration tester for an in-car navigation company. I guess I am old though.
No glasses though.
All right. Curious about this one. Chelsea Citarella, neither in support or...
Christian Citarella.
So-
Sorry about my handwriting. That's my handwriting.
Yeah, okay. So neutral on the bill?
Yeah, I'm representing the insurance department.
Okay.
So my name is Christian Citarella. I'm an assistant property casualty actuary at the New Hampshire Insurance Department. I was asked to speak here. The insurance department does not take a position on this legislation, but would like to provide some information with regard to traffic accident data that we looked at. I have a handout here. So, as you're well aware, likelihood of traffic accidents is a major factor in calculating auto insurance rates. Car crash statistics are difficult to compile and analyze due to inconsistent recording of the cause of crash. So whether someone is using a cell phone or just driving and spilled coffee on themselves or driving while tired or driving under the influence, it's very difficult to compile statistics consistently across jurisdictions, across states. We don't know what's actually happening in the car at the time that the accident occurs. Also, when you take into account continual improvements in safety technology, like the introduction of side airbags, anti-lock brakes, and more recently, collision avoidance systems, when you try to compare the number of car crashes year over year, it becomes quite difficult to make any sort of determination as to are we safer than we were prior. If you look at the first slide, one thing, so this would be page 2 in your packet. One thing I tried to do was look at this notion of distracted driving, where cell phone use falls into this category. And the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration put together some statistics, and they try to track this across all states and all jurisdictions. Pretty consistently, about 16% of the 6 million traffic accidents are due to distracted driving, or at least there was at least one distracted driver in the car accident. And this number has remained fairly consistent over the 5 years that they had data. So this went from 2010 through 2014 was the data that was used. The next slide that you have will show that the portion of these distracted drivers that were distracted by cell phones has slowly increased. So the overall number of distracted drivers isn't changing as a portion of the crashes, but those who are being reported as distracted by their cell phones is going up. You can note there too that it seems to be higher in fatalities, in fatal accidents, relative to the others, which I don't know what to make of that, although that appears to be what's happening in the data. I came across a study from 2013 from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration that was very, very specific in what they were researching, to the point where they actually had video cameras in cars watching what the drivers were doing as they came across either they crashed their car or they nearly crashed their car. And so they took into account situations where the driver almost hit a pedestrian but didn't hit the pedestrian, hit the curb, did other activities that may not reach to the level of reported accident. And they came across some interesting results, which is the next slide. There was statistical significance in the relative risk of certain activities relative to non-cell phone use. So if you're using your cell phone, where it says, you see in the chart where it says visual manual, so this is where you're actually doing something with your cell phone. You're either typing on the cell phone, you're reading the cell phone, looking down at the cell phone, or otherwise in some activity with the cell phone, interacting with the cell phone or other device. There's a significantly higher risk of coming across one of these accidents or near accidents. The other one, what this study also did was it compared different types of devices. So a handheld device versus a portable hands-free device versus an integrated hands-free device. And then the two columns to the right, they show you like the relative higher risk. So in the first column compared to a portable hands-free device, and then in the last column relative to a integrated hands-free device. So, bottom line is, according to the study, and again, it's one study of, there were 204 participants in the study, and these were regular private citizens who were being paid to drive around in their car with a camera in their car. And I think it was Virginia, North Carolina, and Maryland is where they did the study. But they had hundreds of hours of driving in the study, and they were 200% more likely to get into a crash or a near crash with a handheld device versus an integrated hands-free device. From an insurance perspective, we do not expect to see the effects of on the auto insurance rates for some time. The hands-free law has only been in effect for less than a year, if I'm correct. And so there's going to be some time before any of this activity works its way into the data that calculates rates. However, we have seen companies apply for surcharges on drivers who have been ticketed for using mobile electronic devices. As this practice becomes more common, insurers will reduce base rates giving advantage to those drivers who do not use handheld cell phones while driving. The final slide I have included, just for context, is to show that if you repeal the texting portion of the law, 265 RSA 265 105A, then we will join 4 other states in America that allow texting while driving. Studies over the last 7 years have generally been inconclusive when it comes to the effect of cell phone laws on frequency of car crashes. As mentioned, consistent data is difficult to come by and it is hard to control for many variables. Although it was a small study, I really I did value quite a bit that one NHTSA study that I cited because it did drill down to the specific activities of the driver during the crash or near crash events. So, any questions?
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Representative Sykes.
Do you have any data that indicates the increased numbers of use of either integrated or hands-free held devices over the same time frame? In other words, there may be not much change. It's a flat line, but if many more people are using these devices, that would have some effect, would it not?
Yeah, that was not included in the reports that I read.
Representative Churchill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for your testimony. Do you have any data at all that shows other states that have had these bans put in place, specifically crash data 5 years prior to that date and 5 years after the ban takes effect? And what does that show if you know?
There was one study that I came across that looked at, I think it was New York State. Let's see if I have it here. That there was so this is from the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, and basically the end of it was that there's a lot of inconclusive reports. There's a lot of inconclusive studies. The one chart that I did see, they looked at 12 months prior, 12 months after the ban went into effect, and the one state they were looking at did move towards the 2 neighboring states. Before, I think it was New York, in the state prior to the ban going into effect, the rates did go towards, they did come down a little bit, but it was very choppy. So the rates each month would change dramatically. And that could be due to all sorts of other factors. It's very difficult to look at all of the different variables involved in car accident frequencies.
Further questions? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the wording distracted driving, that could mean many different things. It's not necessarily cell phone. Would you agree that that's just a handheld cell phone is a subset of distracted driving because there's many other ways of being distracted while driving. And in some of these cases, we're seeing the stats being lumped all together under distracted driving.
Exactly.
Would you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah, which is why I like that particular study from 2013. It is a few years old, but having the camera in the car and looking what the drivers were doing at the time of the incident really shed a lot of light on kind of narrowing down exactly what was going on at the time of the crash. Or in this case, it also takes into account near avoiding crashes.
Thank you.
Representative O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for taking my question. I'm going to question you on page 3 of your slideshow here. And as you compile the data, looking at the fatalities went up to 14% and everything. Who are those fatalities? My question is it just the driver? Is it the old lady that was crossing in the crosswalk, the distracted driver hit them? Is that an all-encompassing fatality report?
That just takes into account any, it could have been 6 cars in the crash. One of the drivers was distracted, and the fatality could have happened in the third car involved. So all it says is that in this particular crash, one of the drivers was distracted, and a fatality occurred.
A follow-up more specifically, does it include pedestrians, people
Yes,
on the
yes, it
sidewalk?
does.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, yes, it
Thank
does.
you.
So this is any incident that involved a car and a fatality.
Representative Walsh?
Thank you, and thank you for your testimony today. You mentioned just a few minutes ago that that insurance rates have not necessarily started to reflect the new law, since it is a year old. When there is a law that changes driving behavior, how long does the insurance agency take to then create rates that reflect what's been put in place? So when do you expect that that kind of data will be compiled, and then you'll make a decision on it?
That's very, very hard to tell.
Okay. So it's not a 2, 3, 5 year thing?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
it doesn't work quite that way. There's just so many variables that go into account, that are taken into account when it comes to setting rates, that it's very hard to see how one law really affects the rates.
But you have seen there are insurance companies that have started to apply
Yeah, this one was specifically
surcharges.
mentioned, yeah.
Okay, for specific behaviors, like
Right.
distracted driving.
I mean, it actually mentions the hands-free driving requirement in New Hampshire. And that if the driver is cited for that, then they will pay more.
Representative Crawford?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for taking my question. Do you have any data, when we're talking about this bill, no one has mentioned the 16 and 17-year-old aspect of the bill where they are not allowed to use any electronic device. Do you have any data on 16 and 17-year-olds with handheld devices? Do you track that at all?
No, we did. There was one report that was put out, a research note by the National Highway Safety Administration that did break out it was looking at these accidents involving distracted drivers, and it did break it out by age. I didn't really take a lot out of that number, because all it did was it said that of the number of, take fatalities, for example. Do we have fatalities here? Yeah, so fatal car crashes. And so of the fatal car crashes that involve cell phones, 4% of those had to do with drivers under the age of 20. And so it does break it out as far as what age groups, are more, have more numbers of accidents. But it doesn't say how, like it was mentioned before, how many of those are driving while texting or driving while talking. And so it's hard to say whether that's more risky or less risky for younger ages or older ages.
Well, doesn't it stand to reason that if you have a causal risk factor, that it will disproportionately affect an inexperienced driver
Yes.
of any age?
I would think so.
Thanks. Further questions? Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for taking my question. In terms of the study itself, did the people participating in it know they were being filmed?
Yes.
They ran the film?
No, this was, they signed up for this, and they were compensated for their time.
Yeah, and they did it anyway?
And they act as completely natural.
Fair enough. Further questions? All right, thank you. Next up, Dan Goodman, in opposition to the bill. Nice catch.
Yeah, geez, Butterfingers.
Pretty quick here. Chairman Smith and other distinguished members of the Health Transportation Committee. My name is Dan Goodman. I'm the Public Affairs Manager for AAA Northern New England. We represent around 470,000 New Hampshire residents. I'm just going to go over a little bit of the research that AAA has done over the last 5 or 6 years on distracted driving. In 2014, we measured brain waves, eye movement, and other metrics to assess what happens to a driver's mental workload when they attempt to do more things at once, like driving a car and talking on the phone, or driving a car and text messaging, or driving a car and doing a voice command. The research found that as mental workload and distractions increase, the reaction time is slowed, the brain function is compromised, they scan the road less, and miss visual cues, potentially resulting in drivers not seeing items right in front of them, which would be like a stop sign, a yield sign, pedestrians in a crosswalk. Recently, we released a study that measured the different infotainment systems in vehicles, and that showed that after a driver had finished making a call, turning on the radio, or composing a text message via voice command, that a distraction could potentially last for another 27 seconds. The second study found that 58% of teen driver crashes analyzed were due to distraction driving. That frequency of distraction of all crashes was found to be about 4 times greater than had been reported by NHTSA. And in 50% of those rear impact crashes, the driver exhibited no reaction at all, meaning that there was no braking or steering to avoid the crash, because usually they were on their phone, distracted. Last year, there were attempts to repeal the New Hampshire's comprehensive distracted driving laws, and that measures failed. We urge this committee to oppose HB 214 and maintain the traffic safety law that discourages distracted driving on our highways.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You open the questions?
Yes.
Okay, Representative Horn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are you familiar with which states in the U.S. have the oldest distracted driving laws?
I'm not. I'm sorry, can I ask a...
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you mean what state had the first distracted driving laws?
Right, which state put distracted driving laws on the books first?
I don't, I'm happy to find out.
Representative O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Perhaps you may not be able to answer my question, but I know you represent AAA of Northern New England, and this committee did yeoman work in trying to come up with the best possible. My question to AAA is it very similar to other states in our nation that have the distracted driving law? Did this committee do its due diligence in coming up with a good law on this?
Oh, certainly. You came up with an excellent comprehensive distracted driving law. I mean, it's important to remember that hands-free is not risk-free, you know, what I kind of talked about in research, but comparing other states, this is a very good law.
Further questions? All right, thank you. Oh, sorry, I didn't say it.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I notice it's AAA of Northern New England. Does that include Massachusetts?
It does not.
Okay.
So it includes Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont. We are all the same AAA club, but we are federations. So yeah, I only work with Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont.
And do you know in Maine, do they have the similar type of law of distracted driving?
They do not. They have they just have a texting ban. They do not have a hands-free.
Sure. And would you happen to know the crash data for the states that you represent for the last year and a half?
I could find that out. I can tell you in all 3 states, the crashes have gone up.
In all 3?
Yes.
Thank you.
Further questions? All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Next up, Ryan Hale, in opposition to the bill.
I have written testimony as well as a fact sheet. Morning. Chairman, members of the committee, I'll be brief. Again, for the record, my name is Ryan Hale. I'm with the New Hampshire Auto Dealers Association. As you know, we represent all the new car dealers, used car dealers, body shops, and service station, power sports, construction, light farm construction equipment. We have about 500 small businesses. We're employing about 13,000 New Hampshire residents in the state of New Hampshire, and we represent about 24% of the retail business. My card says I'm here before you today in opposition to House Bill 214, which is a complete repeal of the New Hampshire distracted driving law. In 2000.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
That's one of those things that's supposed to never happen in here.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, my apologies, and Mr. Hill, my apologies.
Thank you.
Sorry, thank you.
In 2014, this committee heard testimony which identified that distracted driving is becoming a real problem on the roadways, not just here in New Hampshire, but nationally. And the current law on the books was unenforceable. I believe the state police, the time testified out of the 100,000 tickets written, only 16 were for texting. And at that time, the state police also estimated that over the past 6 years, 28% of all fatal car crashes in New Hampshire were the result of distracted driving. And at that time, the committee voted, made a vote of ought to pass 13-3. And the full House, as you know, approved that committee recommendation, which we have on law today. The facts prove and continue to prove that distracted driving puts drivers at a significant risk. And not just the drivers, but everyone they pass, even bystanders walking down the road. It is the greatest blind spot. According to the Virginia Tech Transportation Institute, when a driver who's traveling at 55 miles an hour takes their eyes off the road for 4.6 seconds, they travel the distance of a football field. Think about how many people you pass when you travel one from a football field, whether pedestrians or other vehicles. This increases their chances of being involved in an accident by 23%. Additionally, our novice drivers, our drivers that are 16 to 17-year-old, are at a significantly higher risk when they're driving. They're inexperienced. The National Highway Transportation Safety Administration reported that 15 to 19-year-olds involved in fatal car crashes were using their cell phone 21% of the time. And that a quarter of the teens reported that they respond to a text every time they got behind the wheel. The law seems to be working. Fatal car crashes from distracted driving. This is data that we received from state police, and it's attached in a pie chart to your testimony that I handed out. Fatal car crashes resulting from distracted driving declined the first year the law went into effect. Historically, distracted driving ranked third in fatal car crashes in New Hampshire, or top 3. In 2015, it ranked 6th. Attached, as I mentioned, attached is the pie chart that illustrates this. Additionally, we don't hear a lot of public outcry. Just the opposite. I've talked to people that say they like the law, they think it's working. They still sue people distracted, but they do feel it's working. It is taking an adjustment. Anytime we put a new law into place, it does take a little bit of an adjustment. And the behaviors, as I mentioned, it still exists. But that's not going to change overnight. Again, it will take time. But as you can see in that pie chart, the data proves that it is having an impact. I would like to point out also that this committee over the years has heard testimony that attempts to repeal, not testimony, but attempts to repeal and weaken this law, and they've left this committee with a pretty strong recommendation of IPL. Opponents, I know I've heard that opponents say this impacts and limits their liberties. I say when a decision that a driver makes, such as distracted, sending a text while driving and swerving into my lane of traffic, which endangers me and my family, that hurts my liberties to freely and safely drive on New Hampshire roadways. We shouldn't change this law that is still relatively new and seemingly having an impact. In closing, I ask the committee to please vote ITL on House Bill 214. Let's continue to keep New Hampshire roadways safe and our citizens safe. Thank you, and I'll be more than happy to take any questions.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Questions from the committee? Okay.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
You're welcome.
I appreciate that. Could you just share with us the technology that most of these cars, newer cars, are using to prevent distracted driving and crashes?
Yeah.
You say that we're seeing more and more of this technology.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your question. Yeah, more and more cars are coming with these infotainment centers that have Bluetooth technology. And I forgot to mention in my testimony that we can still use our mobile electronic devices as long as it's Bluetooth one-touch voice commands. We are still able to use them as long as we're able to. Most cars these days come with that Bluetooth capability. And if they don't, there is aftermarket Bluetooth products that are very inexpensive that can be put in the vehicle to assist you with that.
Follow-up. Yes. I was thinking more of some of the commercials that you see where the cars actually stop on their own because someone's stopping, so the person can be distracted, but yet the technology in these cars are actually preventing them from hitting someone in the front, or we've seen some technology where if you're floating to one side or the other, you've got an alarm. So it seems that the car technology of newer cars are really coming around to almost drive automatically.
Yeah.
Are you seeing this being more prevalent?
Thank you for your question. Absolutely, we're seeing more of the crash avoidance technology in vehicles.
Thank you.
Representative O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, Mr. Hill, I'm sorry that I distracted you in your testimony with the phone.
That's quite all right.
But I have an 04 Toyota. It's still on road, doing well. And it was built in ever before Bluetooth, and before I ever could conceive the need to have the phone ringing, you know.
Yep.
And I don't need to talk to anybody instantaneously. So my question is, if I did want to catch up for an old fella into the modern technology, are there aftermarket devices that are Bluetooth, so therefore there's no reason for any driver to hang on to a phone? Am I correct?
Thank you for your question. Absolutely. Best Buy, Radio Shack, all have aftermarket Bluetooth devices that fit right on your your visor that integrate very easily. Before I had purchased my latest car, I had one of those, and it was actually pretty amazing how easy it was to sync the two up and then utilize the Bluetooth technology. I'd also like to point out the latest statistic that I saw: the average vehicle on the road, age of vehicle is 11 years old. 11 years ago, vehicles weren't really that well equipped, my knowledge, with Bluetooth technology, so these aftermarket parts that are out there are a great and effective way to comply with this law.
Representative Sykes.
Do you have any statistics about the actual numbers by percent, I guess would work well, of cars that currently in New Hampshire have the accident avoidance systems that the previous representative talked about?
I don't, but I can look to see if we do have any of those statistics.
I would be curious to know because I suspect it's a very small number.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for the question.
Further questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Captain Shapiro and Sergeant Wheeler, you guys a tag team?
Yes.
All right, you're up.
Thank you. Good morning. Nice to see you all again. I have some prepared testimony that I will send around and wave up position paper in a moment. Just for the record, my name is Matt Shapiro. I'm a captain for the state police, and I'm the highway safety commander for the state police. I brought with me today Sergeant Steve Wheeler, who is the collision analysis and reconstruction unit commander for the state police. So while I have a good amount of experience firsthand, personal knowledge in the area of practice, he has substantially more. And I think he'll be able to provide a very real perspective as to what he's seen over the course of his career, including in the last several years since this law has been in effect. With regard to my position paper, there's some foundational information that I want to speak to because this bill actually has 3 separate parts to it in repeal. So I'll go through that first, and then of course I'll be glad to take any questions at the end. And also while I was listening to the other speakers, I had several chicken scratch notes and other things that I would like to talk about. So I'll do the best I can to be brief. So I'm here to represent the Department of Safety in opposing HB 214, which is intended to repeal 3 laws relative to handheld use of mobile electronic devices while driving. The first one is 259:98-A, paragraph 10, which makes driving a commercial motor vehicle while writing a text message or using 2 hands to type on or operate an electronic communications device as one of the group of violations such as reckless driving and DUI that are classified as serious motor vehicle violations and can be counted towards someone being declared a habitual offender and losing their driving privilege. Federal motor carrier regulations already prohibit commercial vehicle drivers from texting for using both hands to operate an electronic device, so commercial drivers who drive interstate are already familiar with this restriction. Certainly someone operating a heavy commercial vehicle only within the boundaries of the state is no less a hazard if they are distracted by manipulating an electronic device. And also, I don't know the answer to this question, but I would at least exercise caution. I'm not sure how withdrawing that affects federal regulations with regard to the state law that we have. Secondly, the one that most everyone's been talking about today, which is RSA 26579C, which is the basic hands-free law. And that prohibits a driver from using a handheld electronic device for reading, composing, viewing, posting electronic messages, accessing the internet, or inputting information into a GPS device with the vehicle in motion, or manually typing data into any other electronic device, or conducting a phone conversation except to call 911 to report an emergency, unless they're using a Bluetooth-enabled device or other hands-free device to activate, deactivate, or initiate a cell phone function. It also prohibits persons under the age of 18 from driving while using a cell phone or other electronic device while hands-free or not, except to report an emergency. This is essentially what most of the members of this committee are familiar with as HB 1360. As was already pointed out, it was heavily vetted by this committee in 2012, and it's the basic hands-free law that passed. It passed in 2014 and was recommended by this committee with a vote of 13-3. And in furtherance of that, it was later reaffirmed by this committee in March of 2016 with a 13-5 vote against HB 1435, which sought to make the enforcement of the use of mobile electronic devices while driving a secondary offense, which would have been tantamount to a repeal in its effect, because it would have been very difficult for us to enforce that law. This law passed after much careful discussion with police officers, firefighters, commercial vehicle drivers, driver's education instructors, auto dealers, cell phone companies, and many others to ban some of the most dangerous types of distracted driving, such as looking down and typing on an electronic device while driving, yet without stifling communication. It was done in response to an epidemic of distracted driving taking place on our roadways, contributing to many serious and fatal crashes. It had 17 House and Senate sponsors. It did not take effect until the Department of Safety, Department of Transportation, Highway Safety Agency, and other public and private partners conducted a year-long public education program pertaining to the hazards of distracted driving and to familiarize everyone with the new law. Many thousands of drivers were reached through, and many of you will remember this, the airing of radio PSAs, several television and news stories, newspaper articles, a hands-free landing page, Marilyn Bachman's social media PSA, the New Hampshire Driving Choice Zero Booth volunteers who handed out flyers at events such as NASCAR races, UNH hockey games and football games, road races, at rest areas, and many other wellness and community events. Many others were also messaged through defensive driving classes, driver's education courses, posters being hung at fire departments, police stations, and other government buildings around the state, the auto dealers using steering wheel inserts or other showroom displays, and many distracted driving PSAs being displayed on the state's highway electronic message board systems, and local and state police handing out informational flyers on traffic stops or any other time that was practical to do so. In other words, a lot went into that over the course of a year. And the third RSA that this looks to repeal is RSA 265-105A, which was referred to in previous testimony as the previous 2010 law about texting that was very difficult to enforce. And that law prohibits drivers from writing or texting or using two hands to type on or operate an electronic telecommunications device, except when reading, selecting, or entering a phone number. This law dates back to 2010, is actually superseded by the 2015 hands-free law, so no harm would come by repealing it, except that in such case, RSA 259:98-A10 should be replaced with this statute 265-105A in commercial vehicles to 265-79C. And again, I don't know whether or not that affects the commercial vehicle law, but it's something to consider. So I guess the relevant question after all that foundation is, what is the state of the state with regard to distracted driving after a year-long public education program and 18 months of traffic enforcement? And the answer is I think that the problem with distracted driving persists. However, it's dramatically better than it was a few years ago. And I would offer, in evidence of that, that it is true that in the last 18 months, troopers alone have stopped 9,400 drivers for such things as texting, watching videos, reading, using email, dialing, using social media, and talking on handheld devices while driving. But that being said, the vast majority of the motoring public has voluntarily complied with the law, either by using hands-free technology, or pulling over, or abstaining from using the phone while driving. And while 9,400 stops is no doubt a significant amount of violations, it should be considered that is amongst an incalculable amount of driving operations being observed. In fact, during the same period, the New Hampshire State Police also stopped 112,961 drivers for speeding and arrested 1,800 people for DUI. And I'm quite sure that everyone knows that drinking and driving is not a good idea. This is not to say that the handheld use of mobile electronic devices while driving does not still cause serious and fatal crashes, because it does. It's still regularly looked at by the State Police Car Unit, who investigates such cases on a daily basis. People here in New Hampshire have been, and continue to be, gravely injured or killed, and their liberties and lives taken by distracted drivers. But some very promising news is that the data analyst for the Department of Safety reports that she's been doing this for 20 years. For 18 years in a row, distracted driving was listed as one of the top 3 causes of fatal crashes in New Hampshire, along with speed and DUI. And this was until 2015, when it dropped to number 7. The previous witness had number 6, but it dropped significantly. I have it as number 7. In 2016, when it dropped to number 8. And this is despite the fact that fatal crashes in New Hampshire went up by 41% over those 2 years. And there's a number of reasons why that has taken place. Probably in part because of the drug epidemic. It's also because of macro conditions that have to do with an improving economy, vehicle mile traveled being up, fuel costs being down, and so forth. But while fatal crashes have gone up dramatically, the portion of fatal crashes related to distracted driving has gone down dramatically. In fact, inattention distraction was recorded as causing 15% of fatal crashes in 2014, 6% in 2015, and 1.6% so far this year. Now, that sounds good, and I think that pattern is basically what it seems to be. But I just want to caution you on something you've heard me say many, many times before, and some of the previous testimony mentioned as well, which is, do I think that 1.6% of the crashes are caused by distracted driving, or is that low? There's no doubt it's low. And part of the reason is why is whether it's all crashes, which are estimated to be 20 or 25% caused by people using electronic devices. I think that's one of the figures AAA used. Or fatal crashes, it is grossly underreported. People do not roll over into the interstate and then the state police show up and they say, yep, you got me, I was on my phone, or I was texting, or I was looking at some video on my phone. It doesn't happen. And even with regard to fatal crashes, driving on the influence is much more dialed in statistically with that, because blood samples are taken. So you have a better idea about whether or not the person was impaired. However, only the most serious crashes having something to do with electronic devices actually are investigated using search warrants on cell phones. So even with regard to fatal crashes, if a single vehicle, single occupant crashes into a tree, you may never know whether or not that was cell phone related or not. So it's very likely that that's underreported. There's another reason why it's underreported, and that is the way the Department of Safety keeps statistics. It always correlates DUI first. And as you probably know or suspect, risk takers tend to take more than one risky behavior. People who drink and drive tend to use their cell phone while driving, tend to drive too fast, and tend to not wear their seatbelt. So if somebody was looking down at their phone and DUI and doing 90, it will most likely be listed as a DUI first. So that's another reason why I doubt 1.6% is just related to cell phones. However, it was always underreported. So it was underreported in 2010, 2014, and today, which means the basic pattern still holds. It appears to be going down relative to the number of fatal crashes distracted driving causes. So in conclusion, distracted driving is without question a very hazardous driving behavior, and that the use of mobile electronic devices while driving law is crafted by this legislative body to combat. And I would say, and this came up in previous years' testimonies as well, including today, from some of the people who signed in and testified in front of you today, they agree. Almost everybody agrees it's not a good idea. Whether or not you do it is a different thing, but almost everybody says it's not a good idea, that it's a dangerous driving behavior. And that this law, crafted by this legislative body, is working. It's stopping many drivers from driving with their heads down and looking at or manipulating a handheld electronic device, and in doing so, preventing a crash. We at the Department of Safety do not believe this is the time to repeal laws. Recent legislatures have worked so hard to pass and have only now begun to show some statistical indications of success. And I will add to that a few notes that I made while I was listening to the other speakers. And I'll speak from personal experience. I obviously drive every day, and I drive a cruiser every day, and I still write tickets driving to and from every day. And there are people out there that are still doing that, and that's one of the complaints is we have average citizens who have complied routinely want to say to me, "Where were you? I drove up here from Manchester today, and I saw this person doing this, and they were swerving from side to side." Or they were at a traffic light and they held up 6 cars going through the light. This does happen. But as I'm driving on the interstate and I'm sliding by cars or looking around for cars to the left and right, I can tell you one thing for sure. Unequivocally, there are a lot less people doing this. A lot less. And this is not to say that I can't take a motivated trooper and send him out there and say, bring me 15 violations by the end of the day, because they will find it. But it takes work. And that's not what was going on 4 or 5 years ago. This was happening, whatever the number was, every 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 cars at every intersection, every main street, every car that you slid by on the highway, everywhere culturally this was going on. And that has changed. There's no doubt about it, that has changed. And I can also tell you from my personal experience, in a year and a half of writing these tickets, I have never had anybody tell me that they weren't aware of this law. And I have really never had anybody give me a hard time about it. Whatever the circumstance. Something came up, I had to call work, I had to call my daughter, or I was texting my son about this, that, or the other thing. It's basically, yeah, I know, you got me. Or if you have somebody on the phone like this and they see you driving right next to them for 10 seconds and then they see the cruiser, it's like they just touched a hot piece of coal. They know immediately what's going on. So that's a personal perspective. And I would add to that 2 other things. About a year ago, I don't know, time goes by and we're all very busy. Within a year or so, I was at a transportation conference in Worcester, Massachusetts. A Massachusetts Northeast Transportation Conference. And so I went to several breakout sessions. And in 2 of them, one of them was related to drug driving, and I was here before the legislature in 2012 talking about the drug issue and the DUI and why it needs to be expanded. And the second one was with relation to what Massachusetts is trying to do. And 2 different sets of speakers speaking at those breakout sessions. And both of them used almost the exact same language, which was to reference New Hampshire and say that New Hampshire is the gold standard when it comes to these 2 laws, which was a very proud moment for me, having put a lot of work into this here over the years. You know, I was proud of that, because we together put a lot of work into this and trying to change the driving culture. And as you'll remember, that wasn't just about the average person driving. That was about law enforcement driving, firefighters driving, ambulance drivers, and everyone making the decision to do this together and to try and do the right thing to be safe and not stifle communication. And lastly, I will point out also from my own personal perspective that the motor vehicle code is about that thick. And there's a lot of laws in there that have come back around for a lot of reasons. And I'll just give you one single example. It's a requirement in New Hampshire to have front plate on the car. which I think is a good idea. It's a good idea because the police need to be able to identify a vehicle as it's passing them. And actually, quite frankly, citizens do too. There was a robbery or somebody almost ran over them in a crosswalk or whatever the case. It's a good idea. But has not having a front plate ever caused a motor vehicle crash? No, it hasn't. We have all kinds of laws that don't directly relate to crashes. But I can tell you, and he's about to tell you, there is no question that driving under the influence of alcohol and drugs and distracted driving, especially related to cell phones and speed, absolutely directly correlate to serious and fatal crashes. And it's absolutely necessary that we do something about this and that we continue along the path that we have started. So I would like to just turn it over to Sergeant Wheeler, because he's going to have a very real perspective and a few examples that I think, should strike home. We'll probably field them at the end, if that's all right with you.
Yep. All right. Thank you, Captain. As the Captain already said, I'm Sergeant Steve Wheeler with the State Police. I am the commander of the Crash Reconstruction Unit, and I've been doing crash reconstruction for over 20 years now. So what my unit does is we respond out to the worst of the worst on the state highways and secondary roads. The most horrific crashes that happen, the ones that make news, the ones that make the headlines. So when we go out, we have several purposes, but not limited to. We want to figure out what happened, but we also want to figure out why it happened. See if somebody has to be held criminally responsible for their actions. And I can tell you over the last several years that some type of distracted driving has been looked at as one of the top 3 reasons of the crashes that we respond to. The other 2 being speed or driving under the influence. So over the last couple of days, while I was discussing this with Captain Shapiro, we were discussing the stats that he already brought up. Everybody knows fatal crashes in the state have been going up. And then he brought up the fact that the cause of these fatal crashes, the distracted driving part of it, that cause has actually gone down. I was a little surprised by that, to be honest with you. So I went looking for my own purpose. We keep our own logs of the crashes that my unit responds to, and we also keep the causes of those crashes. So in 2016, and I believe most of the testimony has been the fatal crashes that have happened throughout the state. My unit not only responds to fatal crashes, we respond to crashes that have serious bodily injury. So I went looking into the logs that we had kept over the last few years. In 2016, for the crashes that the car unit covered, none of the fatal crashes were related to a distracted driving cause. We did have one that was a serious bodily injury crash, which is also very devastating, and I will talk about that crash in a minute. So I went back to 2015. There were a handful, 3 or 4 crashes that were related to distracted driving, either fatals or serious bodily injury. Went back to 2014. There were a few more. There were several. So, and this is what I'm talking about as far as the primary cause, where some type of distraction or some use of the cell phone was the primary cause of this crash. So like I said, there's been a lot of discussion on fatal crashes that have happened in the state. But I'm here to tell you that the serious bodily injury crashes are just as devastating to the family. And I'd just like to share a few of those crashes that I've personally experienced over the years. The 2016 crash that I just referred to, and this case is closed, so I don't mind telling you a little bit about it. It happened in the city of Portsmouth, where a DPW truck was rear-ended by a driver that was distracted by his cell phone. The investigation showed that. The driver had actually admitted that. It crushed the DPW worker behind the truck. It cut his leg off at the scene and crushed his pelvis. And if it wasn't for the quick response of Portsmouth Fire and Rescue, that person probably would have not made it. Second one I want to talk about happened on Route 3 up in the northern, Route 3A, I'm sorry, up in the northern part of the state. A vehicle, it's a 2-lane road, Route 3A in this particular area of the state. 2-lane road, a subject was on the wrong side of the road for anywhere from 12 to 20 seconds based on witness testimony. 12 to 20 seconds this lady was on the wrong side of the road. She crashed head-on with another vehicle, caused fatal injuries to the passenger and serious injuries to the operator of that vehicle. The first witness that ran up to that lady that was on the wrong side of the road, witnessed her with her cell phone in her hand as her car was upside down in the middle of the road. I don't think I'd be able to grab my cell phone if I just crashed head on into somebody. I don't think that'd be my first thought, would be to grab my cell phone. The next one, back in 2014, that comes to mind is a crash that happened on Route 3 down in the southern part of the state. This is also a 2-lane road with intersections. It actually happened in Allenstown, where a young girl ran a red light. A red light had been red for several seconds, long enough for the traffic to start flowing in the opposite direction. Long enough for a motorcycle to pull into the middle of that intersection and get taken out. The operator was transported to a local hospital but died of his injuries. Investigation showed the person was on their cell phone, texting at the time of that crash. And lastly, several years ago, I believe it was 2012 now, there was a case on Route 28 in the town of Pittsfield. This area of Route 28 not only allows for traffic going in opposite directions, but also had a center turning lane. So the roadway was actually 3 lanes wide with breakdown lanes on either side. The operator, investigation showed, was on the wrong side of the road for several hundred feet, crashed into a family, and seriously injured the passenger that was behind the driver to the point where he is now a quadriplegic. So I guess in closing, just from my first-hand experience, what I have seen out on the roadway, that over the years the law is working. It's reducing the number of crashes that are related to distracted driving. So if it saves one life, saves one person from being paralyzed, saves me from showing up at a family's door at 3 o'clock in the morning, I think it's worth it. Thank you.
I'd be happy to answer any questions. Of course, Sergeant Wheeler had a very long list of cases to choose from, and it's a difficult job to do that day in and day out. So I very much appreciate him coming in and sharing with you with you.
Representative Horn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for showing up and for your testimony. How long does the driving law have to be on the books before we can get meaningful data on how it's affecting driver behavior?
Well, that's a fair question, but it's complicated, and the previous testimony already alluded to that, both mine and AAA, which is I gave you what I thought was pretty meaningful data, and we have to take it with a grain of salt. Distracted driving is underreported for all crashes. Drivers rarely get into a crash, not whether it's serious or fatal, just any crash, and say, you got me, I did it. That's what caused the crash. So those are estimates. And even of the serious and fatal crashes, the vast majority of those aren't investigated to the degree that he's speaking about, where search warrants are done and justice is being sought at the highest level. So we give you the best data that we can, some being by estimate and some being by general trends, and I guess some maybe by common sense as to what's being seen on the roadways, or at least our own personal perspective in enforcing the laws and investigating the crashes. But meaningful, I guess, is in the eye of the beholder.
Other questions? Senator Churchill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for really looking after the general public safety. I do appreciate that. First question is the incidents that you talked about, the crash data that we just discussed. Can you tell me if that was before the bill took effect or after the bill took effect?
Well, specifically the 3 years I related, 2014 was before, and that was when the fatal crashes were listed at 15% for distraction and inattention. This law took effect, if you'll remember, in July of 2004. It had a 1-year public education program which went into July of 2015. So there's 1 year of public education, which was followed by 18 months of enforcement, also mixed with more public education. So the last 2 years, 15 and 16, were after.
I apologize for not being more specific. The state trooper here that mentioned these terrible crashes, I mean, your heart goes out on those, no doubt about it. I want to know if those incidents were after the law or before the law?
Yes, sir. The very last one, the Pittsfield one that I talked about was 2012, so that was before the law. The third one that I talked about back in 2014 was also before the law. The one in 2015 that happened on Route 3 up north was within a month after the law passing. It was in July, so it was after the law passed. And the one serious bodily injury crash with the Portsmouth DPW worker, that was 2016. So 2 of them were before, 2 of them were after.
May I follow up, Mr. Chairman? Yes. Another quick question. I was reading this morning of a Nashua police officer who mentioned that a lot of these drivers, he's seeing a lot of drivers, and there was testimony early on, that people are still on a cell phone, but they're bringing it really low. And this is from a Nashua police officer saying that he feels that that's an issue. Do you feel that that's an issue as well?
Well, I can tell you that that was happening before the hands-free law went into effect. I was enforcement law, so it absolutely was happening before because texting was illegal since 2010. So we had the same thing going on. What we went from was previous to 2010, people had their elbow up on a wheel doing this at traffic lights and so forth, and after 2010, some went down. But from my perspective, and I guess I can speak for all of us from the state police, the vast majority of us are driving Dodge Chargers. I'm not driving a very high platform vehicle. And now I'm driving in and amongst traffic on 93, and I slide up next to somebody. The nice thing about enforcement and distracted driving is when someone's doing it, it's not very hard to enforce because they're distracted. When you have somebody that's watching a video like this, when they're driving down the interstate or typing on a phone, they don't know that you're there because they're otherwise distracted. None of these tickets are being written because somebody's looking down in their lap. I don't know whether or not they dropped change or whatever the case. But the point is that those addictive behaviors in trying to get around the law, sometimes that are taking place were happening before this more comprehensive law went into effect anyway.
Can I follow up, Mr. Chairman, real quick? I apologize, but I didn't get the answer to the question that I actually asked.
First, Representative Trojan, can you pass me that blue sheet, or probably plural, please, and you can have one more swing at it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do appreciate it. And again, like I said, I really appreciate what you guys are doing, looking out for public safety. The article that I read was recently, where a national police officer, this is after the law, is basically in a newspaper article saying that more and more people are bringing the phone down because they're trying to elude being captured. I get that, but do you feel that that's more of a danger when it's down here versus here? I get that it's not good either way, but is that an issue for you? I mean, is that a concern for you? Is what I should say.
Yes, I would prefer that people didn't do anything and complied with the law. That being said, you have to look at the big picture, which is, I appreciate that Nashua police officer's frustration at sometimes not being able to enforce the law, if that's what he was alluding to, that he was finding it difficult to do. However, we are trying to change the driving culture, which takes time. And this should improve over time, both because the messaging of the law, because for those who didn't comply, a number of them will be motivated by receiving traffic tickets, because over time more and more people will buy cars with hands-free technology, because sometimes other people have technology and they wind up seeing it and finding that it's easy and they should have transitioned a long time ago. But over time, this should be improving. I'm saying that I understand perhaps the frustration that this person that you were speaking about conveyed, but I can tell you, I've also been doing this my 23rd year, and I'm very frustrated by the fact that the state police arrested 1,300 people for DUI last year, and the year before, and the year before, and the year before. And if we didn't have 350 people and we had 750 people, we probably would have arrested 2,000 people for DUI. So it doesn't make it any less hazardous, it doesn't make it a good idea. We do the best we can to enforce and message it. So that's where we're at.
Thank you.
Representative O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I would like to thank Sergeant Wheeler for what you do with the accident information. As a former firefighter, it's tragic when you have to deal with something as stupid as trying to get somewhere and get into an accident. But my question is to Captain Shapiro. I thank you for your recognition of the hard work that we have worked together with the New Hampshire State Police, and you in particular, and thank you for your recognition of this committee and the hard work that we came with. We morphed a lot of different things to get to this point with the distracted driving law. But you sat in the audience today, and because of the hard work that you have done in the past, you heard the testimony and everything. Do we hear anything today? You expressed a lot of your personal opinions, but did you hear anything today, both in your opinion or professionally, that would change the yeoman work that we did with this, to change any need to change the law? It's currently working right now.
From what I heard, I think that from what I heard today and for the last several years, that in general, the vast majority of people, even some who oppose this law, admit it's very dangerous driving behavior and we shouldn't do it. And in light of that, and the fact that it, without question, causes fatal crashes, and that in the work that was done was to try and find a law that was comprehensive and, as you will remember, enforceable, that we're able to message it and enforce it and take appropriate action when necessary. I see nothing to indicate that that's not the case. I remember as I sat here in 2012, a lot of the arguments were, well, this is going to be unenforceable, this is unenforceable, it'll never be enforced. And I said, whatever the statistic was, we wrote 60 tickets, you know, on a law that was unenforceable in 2010. And part of the reason for doing this was actually to fix the law and make it enforceable. And I said before you today, just the state police, not the 240 other agencies in the state, just the state police has almost 10,000 stops with us. So I believe to that end, we were proven to be correct. That was the point of what we were trying to do. And we're only 2.5 years into this. And I'm sure you'll remember, as a matter of fact, I think it was part of the conversation about what it took to change culturally what was going on with DUI from, let's say, 1975 until 2015. You know, this took place over a long period of time. And a lot of these things are social changes. But this one is a good one. It's something that is very hazardous. Everyone knows it, whether or not they do it or not. And we would like to see everyone, without stifling communication, do it the safest way possible. And I think the legislation has worked. It has been effective in its enforcement, and apparently it looks like it's reducing serious crashes as well.
I did see you, Representative Van.
Thank you for taking my question. Thank you, sir. My question is, you were talking anecdotally about what you see when you drive. So my question is, you see fewer people with like this. So what's your best guess on the overall reduction of use? Just from what you see out your car window, you know, the argument we've heard is, okay, well, so people are not doing this anymore, now they're doing this. So what's your best guess? Is it overall down, the use?
Oh, there's no doubt about it. There's absolutely no doubt that it's down. I would estimate before we took this up in 2010, 11 or so, it was probably 1 in maybe 8 vehicles who stood out here on Main Street in Concord or at the lights at the bottom of 93 map. And we did the same experiment today. I think it would be dramatically lower than that. And so I guess you have to look at it in a sense, and I think this is borne out in other studies in other states, whether or not they can clearly correlate it to whether or not it reduces crashes. It appears to definitively reduce it as a driving behavior. So then you have to bridge that by saying, well, if we know that it's a dangerous driving behavior and it can cause serious crashes, having less people do it is probably a good thing. So if it went to 1 in 25 or 1 in 50 or whatever it might be at this time, I can't tell you specifically how many of those would have crashed, because you make the same argument for DUI. How many of the people who were drinking and driving would have made it home that night? Well, maybe 9 out of 10 would have made it home that night, but if I got the one, then that one saves a crash. Or another thing, which often comes up with regard to drinking and driving is, even if they all would have made it home, if there's no intervening in that driving behavior, they will do it again and again and again and again until they do crash. And I think the same thing happens with regard to this. Less people are doing it, and sometimes when they're doing it, there's enforcement action taken, which is probably changing their driving behavior, and they're less likely to be involved in a crash. So from all angles, reducing of crashes, reducing this as a driving behavior, and the reasonable outcome that reducing it as a driving behavior probably reduces crashes anyway, I think that this has been a win. And without question, it's an enforceable law.
Further questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Did you guys have, yeah, there you go. Does anyone else wish to be heard on House Bill 214? Seeing none. There are a couple of illegibles on the blue sheet. The committee's free to look at it and decipher it with the committee assistant if they choose afterwards. I'll tell you how many on which side, but I'll read the ones I can get. In support of the bill, Will Anderson. Can't read that one. Representative from Hillsborough 21. Representative Ammon. Representative Joshmore. Tori Sullivan. Take a big breath. In opposition to the bill, Representative Carol Roberts. David Dougherty. Merrimack 20. Representative Lay. No shot at that one, maybe Northern. Representative from Grafton 12.
Yeah, that would be Northern.
Nice, I got it. Doesn't happen every day. Representative Gould. Representative Jan Schmidt. Valerie Eros, New Hampshire Medical Society. House Democratic Leader, Representative Shirtliff. Representative Gottlieb. Representative Suzanne Smith. Representative Mays. Assistant Majority Leader, Representative Gagnon. Representative Keene. Can't read that one. Representative from Hillsborough 35. Representative Clee. Representative Wolpert. And that will close the public hearing on House Bill 214. Our next hearing.
We'd like to invite you to visit freekeen.com. Freekeen.com features audio, video, and blogs chronicling the transition to a voluntary society. Freekeen.com also has comments and discussion forums so you can be heard. Freekeen.com.
I should be in Keene, New Hampshire with the Free Staters.